So, guess who just filmed this entire video and was not in the frame? Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking to you about culture shock and reverse culture shock, two things I am very familiar with, given that I've already done 3 years abroad. The first was to Ireland at age 17, the second was England at age 18, 19, and the third one was just last year where I went to Tokyo, Japan to study at university there. I think most people would assume that the culture shock for me when I went to Japan was the strongest for all the three, because obviously Japan is very different from Austria, compared where Ireland and England maybe have more similarities. But honestly, the worst for me was actually when I went to Ireland for the very first time. I do have this theory that culture shocks work somewhat with diminishing returns, so that the more often you actually experience something like that, like a completely different culture, spending a year abroad and stuff like that, it just gets so much easier. It becomes much more your routine and you're not as, rattled by it anymore, I guess. So that's kind of why I think that the first time going abroad was the hardest for me. So culture shock basically works in a upwards, downwards kind of motion, where you have like high highs and low lows, then they do just kind of alternate. So the first high that you experience is usually right after you land in your foreign country. You're so excited to be there. You have probably, built up expectations of how it's going to be. You probably have reasons why you chose to go abroad to that particular country. So, you probably like the country and have all these things that you're finally going to get to experience yourself, and so that all combined means that you're usually in a pretty euphoric state for the first few weeks or months in that foreign country. After those initial few months though, you're probably gonna notice a kind of drop in your mood. And that is when the actual culture shock starts to kick in. At that point, you tend to start comparing the country you're in to your home country, and you start to find flaws with this new country and its culture. For me, just to give you an example, when I was in Ireland, I noticed that at least my host family, I have no idea how many people in Ireland actually do this, but at least my host family, they used to make mashed potatoes by taking their whole potatoes, boil them, and then add a ton, and I mean a ton, of mayo, and just mash the two together. And that was how they made mashed potatoes. And honestly, to me, that was the most ridiculous thing. I hate mayo. It's just so disgusting to me. There's so much fat in it. It is the worst. It is so bad for you. And just the thought of putting mayo in your mashed potatoes was disgusting to me. That's just like a tiny example, because I think maybe objectively you could say that that's not that great. There were tons of tiny things that started to bother me a lot. Situations where I thought, the way that people do things here is so stupid. We have a much better way of doing it at home. The people here are so stupid. They do things the wrong way. They think the wrong way and stuff like that. Like, it obviously all sounds very bad, and especially if you're the one thinking these things, you probably will have, feel bad about yourself. But the thing you need to remember is that those sorts of feelings, these negative feelings towards the foreign country, are totally normal at that stage. It does not mean that you are a bad person. It does not mean that you are racist. It does not mean that you are culturally insensitive. It just means that you're in the tight grips of culture shock. I do believe though that it does reflect on your personality, how you deal with these sorts of feelings. Are you going to go out into the world, into this new country, and insult everybody that you meet? Obviously, sort of eating these feelings and not acknowledging them isn't healthy either, but I think it's just important to recognize them for what they are. You are allowed to have negative feelings about this country. You are allowed to feel homesick and the people in your country have figured out better ways to deal with a certain situation. You are allowed to have those emotions, because that is totally normal as part of the process of adjusting to a new country and a new culture that you are not used to. It is definitely, I think, the hardest phase of the entire experience, but once you're through that rough patch, it does go uphill again. The phase immediately after the culture shock, once you're out of it, isn't like a spike. in euphoria and ecstasy, but it sort of will settle into a normal routine where you've more or less adjusted to the country, to the culture, to the people there, and you just sort of, you know, are on the way to making that your new home and being completely content, you know, and recognizing that every country and every culture and every person has flaws and they have good sides. And whereas in the first stage of adjustment you've only seen the good parts, and in a second you've only seen the bad, you will start to see both and, you know, just be fine. And then here's the good news, it will sort of trickle on kind of this way in a kind of content, more or less content state for the entire rest of your exchange year. But then the next problem arises when it is time to go home. Essentially, after going home, you experience a kind of weaker, mirrored version of the first two phases of culture shock. At first, when you get back home and you see all your friends and your family again and all the things that you've missed so much about your home country, you're obviously super happy about that. But then inevitably, you do kind of the same thing again. You start comparing your home country to the country you just left, and you start finding flaws with your own country now, and you start to feel nostalgic about whatever country you went abroad to. Reverse culture shock is typically not as strong as culture shock, but I don't think that's a rule. It could be worse too if you're particularly attached to the country that you just left. I don't really remember if I criticized Austria a lot at that time, but I do remember being back home in my mom's kitchen for the first time after not having been there for like 9 months and feeling so strange. Honestly, it was the weirdest feeling, and I remember asking my mom for permission to have a banana because when I lived with my host family in Ireland, we were required to ask, you know, can I eat this? Do you mind if I eat this? Like, they would let us eat things, obviously, because they were required to provide us with food, but I just, you know, it was just polite to ask. You can't just like take all their stuff and eat it all. But I actually asked my mom for permission, and she like looked at me really funny and she's like, of course, why are you asking? And it was just that sort of thing that felt so weird, and I felt like the need to ask for permission. I didn't feel like I could just take it, even though I was completely used to doing that before having been to Ireland. But as it always ends, you do also get used to your home country again, and you do acclimatize again, and you get adjusted. And that is, I think, one of the most wonderful things about us as human beings. We are so flexible. We are so good at adjusting to new circumstances. That's how our species survived this long on the planet in not the best conditions. We are very good at adjusting to new situations. Even though it is sometimes a little bit painful and it might take a while, we always adjust and we're always fine in the end. And that is something to remember when you're going through something like this. So that was my experience with culture shock from my time in Ireland. Honestly, when I went to England, I don't think I experienced any particular culture shock because England and Ireland are truly very similar. And when I went to Japan, I did experience some culture shock, but I think because I had been through culture shock before, I had taken a class on intercultural communication where we were also taught about this in detail, and you know, when you're aware of something, it's always much easier to deal with. And also because I had done a lot of research on Japan as a country and its culture in my university classes. I think this is definitely one of the most important points, because the more that you are anticipating certain situations and you're expecting to be maybe confronted with certain things, the easier it's going to be to actually experience them and to actually deal with them. You're not going to be as surprised, you're not going to be as taken aback. You know, the reality of what you're experiencing is going to be more in line with what you expected, and that's always good for adjusting to something. If you're expecting one thing and it's completely different, you're probably going to have a lot more of a harder time to actually adjust to the new thing than if you're like only maybe a little bit off or something like that. Anyway, you guys, if you are in a foreign country right now or about to embark on the journey of going on an exchange year, I hope that this video was helpful to you, that you learned something new, and that it prepared you for what is about to come or for what you're going through already, and to let you know that it's totally normal, totally okay, and you don't have to feel bad about it. Everybody experiences these sorts of things, and you just need to remember that it will get better eventually. I hope you you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and click the subscribe button down below for more videos starring this face. I will see you soon. Have a lovely week. Bye!